Hello, YouTube friends. Welcome everyone. Before you get comfortable, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Also, let us know where you're watching from and what time it is there. Kilometer 77, Don't Look Back. Chapter 1. The sign that did not appear on the map, Nebraska State Route 34, didn't used to show up on modern GPS. It was a dusty back road connecting two towns that barely existed anymore. Most truckers knew not to take it, not because it was in bad shape, but for a reason no one said out loud. The road changed. Sometimes you came out at a completely different point than you expected. Sometimes you didn't get out. But that, of course, was not known to brothers Ethan and Derek. Two young men crossing the country from Colorado to Illinois. They were in a 2009 Ford Explorer, loaded with their suitcases, a cooler of beer, and an endless playlist of Southern rock. The plan was to spend the night in Lincoln and then move on. But the GPS began to fail just outside McCook. With no signal, the sun going down fast, and no other directions, Derek, the driver, decided to take the detour on Route 34. The sign read, State Route 34, 77 miles to Larkspur. Ethan frowned. Larkspur. I've never heard of that town. Neither had I, but at least we won't be sleeping in the car. The first kilometers showed nothing unusual. Dry cornfields, some scarecrow that fell apart in the wind, and no other cars on the road. Everything was covered by a veil of reddish dust that seemed to float in the air like fog. After about 40 minutes, they began to notice the strangeness. First, the same rusty mailbox appeared twice. The same hand-painted number, 217. Then, an abandoned gas station with the same graffiti on the wall reappeared exactly 10 minutes after they passed it the first time. "Wait," said Ethan, adjusting his belt. "We've seen this before." Derek nodded, but tried to play it down. There must be another station like it, with the same dropped bomb and the same ice for sale sign. I don't think so. As night fell, the radio began to emit static, even though it was not on. The car's headlights reflected off things that weren't there. Figures on the side of the road that disappeared when you looked directly at them. Ethan tried to pick up his cell phone. No signal. The clock on the dashboard blinked. 3:03 a.m., even though they knew it was no later than 8 p.m. "What the fuck is going on, Derek?" "I don't know, but I'm not going to stop." His voice was already tense. Then the sign appeared. "Welcome to Larkspur." A time-worn wooden sign illuminated by a single flashing lantern. At its feet, a sign with blurred lettering. Population 0. Derek hit the brakes. "Did you see that?" "Yes," Ethan whispered. "What do you mean, 0? They advanced slowly. The road turned into a deserted main street. Abandoned houses with broken windows. A church without a bell. A motel with a sign that sparkled, "Open." And yet, there was not a soul. "I don't like this," Ethan muttered. "Let's get out of here." Derek nodded, but just as he tried to make a U-turn, the engine cut out. "No, no, no, no," he shouted, turning the key. "Nothing. Are you making fun?" He's not answering. They opened the doors. A dense, musty smell crept into their lungs. The wind brought with it a constant murmur, as if many voices were speaking from far away. The car's lights began to flicker on their own. "Did you hear that?" Ethan asked. "Don't say anything. Go into the motel. Maybe there's someone there." They walked to the reception desk. A rusty bell on the counter. They pressed it. Ding. Nothing. Until from the back of the hallway emerged a very thin, grayish-skinned woman with a stained apron and glassy eyes. She moved as if she were not walking, as if she were floating lightly across the floor. "A room for two?" he asked in a choked voice. The brothers hesitated. "Do you have a phone? Can we call but a tow truck?" Ethan asked. "There are no lines, but you can spend the night. Tomorrow everything will be better." The woman smiled, but her teeth were blackened and some were very long. They paid with a bill Derek carried in his pocket, and he handed them a metal key with the number 7 on it. The motel hallway seemed longer on the inside than on the outside. Flashing lights, dirty carpet that smelled of stale urine. The walls dripped with moisture. When they reached the room, they noticed that the door had fingernail marks on it. On the inside, they entered. Everything seemed normal, except for one detail. The wall clock, without batteries, also read 3:03. "It's the same damn number," Ethan whispered. They showered without taking off their clothes completely and got into their beds, although they did not sleep. Something told them that if they closed their eyes for too long, they would wake up somewhere else. Or they wouldn't wake up at all. A few hours later, a sharp knock sounded against the door. "Talk." "OCD. What was that?" Ethan whispered, slowly getting up. "Don't open," said Derek, almost pleading. But it was late. Ethan approached the door viewer. No one was there, only the darkness of the hallway, until something moved in the reflection of the mirror behind him. A figure, tall, with disproportionately long arms, no face, but with a gaping jaw that hung down to his chest. When Ethan turned around, there was nothing. Talk. Now the banging was coming from the window. They were on a second floor. Outside, the figure hung upside down, like a huge bat, with empty black eyes boring into his. "Run!" Derek shouted. They left the room. The hallway seemed even longer. At the back, the woman at the reception desk was watching them. Only now she had completely white eyes and needle-thin fangs. "They can't leave. They're already here." The brothers went downstairs. The front door would not open. They banged on it, and the wood splintered. When we turned around, the whole town was surrounded by a thick fog, like a wall that did not allow us to see even 5 steps. But the car was now running, alone. The headlights were flashing, as if waiting for them. They ran to him. Derek jumped into the driver's seat, Ethan into the passenger seat. They turned the key. The engine roared. They put it in reverse, then first, and sped down Main Street without looking back. The sign that read, "Welcome to Larkspur," appeared again. Only now it said, "Population 2, Kilometer 77, don't look back." Chapter 2, The Map That Does Not Exist. The engine screeched as if something was slowing it down from the inside. Derek squeezed the steering wheel hard, and Ethan kept glancing in the rearview mirror. The fog covering Larkspur wasn't dissipating. On the contrary, it seemed to want to follow them, creeping across the asphalt like a living tongue licking the road. "Don't stop. Don't slow down. Don't look back," Ethan said like a mantra. "I don't intend to." The Ford crossed the line that marked the exit of the town, and for a few minutes, eternal, nothing happened. No figures on the side of the road, no repeated stations, just a straight road under a sky too black for the hour. But suddenly, the radio, which was not even connected to the Bluetooth, began to broadcast a transmission. "They should not have entered. The number is updated. Do not leave the route. Do not stop. Kilometer 77 is closer than you think." They both looked at the radio as if it were a snake. What was that? Did you hear it? Kilometer 77. What does that mean? Ethan picked up his cell phone. Miraculously, there was a streak of signal. Wasting no time, he went to Google Maps. But there was no GPS signal. Just a straight line. No names. No landmarks. The location was listed as unidentified route. Then he saw something else. On the map, which was not supposed to show anything, there was a small red spot, a kind of marker, as if someone had left a pin. It said, KM77, don't stop. He tried to move the map, zoom in, zoom out, but everything froze, and then the cell phone died. It can't be. What? Asked Derek. The GPS marked me at kilometer 77. Someone left a digital note there, and then my cell phone just died. This isn't normal, Derek. They drove on. The landscape did not change. Dry fields, skeletal trees, and the same left turn that appeared every 10 minutes, as if they were stuck in a loop, until something different happened. A car, a beat-up white sedan, appeared stopped on the shoulder. The emergency lights flickered dimly. A car, Ethan exclaimed. Maybe we can call for help. Derek slowed down. Are you sure? If they were trapped like us, we could understand what's going on. Maybe they'd know how to get out. They parked behind the sedan. As they approached, they noticed that the driver's door was open. Inside, there was no one. Only a notebook on the passenger seat, full of childish scribbles and drawings in black pencil. But the drawings, they were not normal. They were not landscapes nor little houses. They were eyes, hundreds of eyes. Some were crying, others were bleeding. Some were open like saucers, and others seemed to be inside mouths. On one of the pages, written in nervous strokes, a phrase was repeated over and over again. Don't get to kilometer 77. We have to go, said Derek. Now back in the truck, they accelerated, but every time they passed a sign, they noticed that there was no clear numbering, just posts, until they saw one that, in hand-painted black numbers, read KM68. God, Ethan shouted. We're close. Close to what? The end or hell? They didn't know it. But the atmosphere began to change. The sky turned a dirty gray. The air became heavy. The car began to shake, not mechanically, but as if something was shaking it from inside the metal. Then they saw it. On the horizon, a figure walked down the middle of the road. He did not move like a person. His steps were irregular, as if he didn't know how to use his legs. It had no face, just a black wet cavity where a face should have been. Don't brake, said Ethan, but it's in the way. Don't brake. Derek turned the steering wheel. The car swerved slightly, grazing the figure, which disappeared like a puff of smoke. A high-pitched shriek, like broken pottery, erupted inside the vehicle. They both covered their ears. When they regained control, they noticed they were on a bridge, but they didn't remember crossing any before. And underneath, there was no river, just darkness. Not a metaphorical darkness. It was like looking into the bottom of an endless well, a hole where light had no meaning. No, there's no bottom, Ethan whispered. Where are we? The van stopped on its own as it reached the center of the bridge. No matter how hard I stepped on the accelerator, the car didn't respond, nor the steering, nor the brakes. Then they saw something that chilled the blood in their veins. In front of the vehicle, standing in the middle of the bridge, were themselves. Ethan and Derek. But they weren't quite themselves. Their eyes were blank. their mouths open as if they were screaming without sound. They wore the same clothes. They had the same injuries from the accident they'd suffered years before, when they'd almost died in a crash. It can't be. Are we seeing us dead? The ghostly versions began to walk toward the vehicle. Each step they took left a sooty footprint on the asphalt. They were not running, but they were getting closer. And every second, the real Ethan and Derek felt the air grow thicker, as if the world around them was collapsing. Then the car's dashboard lit up on its own. A red message appeared. Kilometer 77. Choose. Don't look, look. Derek did not hesitate. Don't look. He closed his eyes tightly. Ethan did the same, and everything went out. Silence, darkness, cold, until a sound, like a spark. They opened their eyes. They were stopped at the side of a perfectly paved road. The sun was rising on the horizon. Birds were flying over a field. In the distance, a sign. Welcome to Kearney, Nebraska. Derek chuckled in disbelief. Shall we go out? Ethan, pale, nodded. It looks like it. But as they glanced in the rearview mirror, one detail froze their blood. On the rear windshield, drawn with a finger in the condensation of the glass, a sentence was read. Not everyone looks back, but some of us look from the inside. Kilometer 77. Don't look back. Chapter 3. The detour that never existed. It had been 2 days since Ethan and Derek escaped from the cursed stretch. Still, the feeling of pursuit wouldn't go away. Try as they might to convince themselves that it had all been a hallucination induced by fatigue or the stress of the road. The message on the windshield could not be so easily explained. Not everyone looks back, but some of us look from the inside. After arriving in Kearney, they stayed at a roadside motel. The dusty blinds, rough sheets, and musty smell offered no comfort, but it was better than driving on aimlessly. During the night, neither of them managed to sleep. Ethan got up every hour to look out the window, sure that something was watching him from the parking lot. Derek wouldn't turn on the TV or cell phone. He would just sit, lights on, smoking non-stop. It wasn't just a scare, said Ethan at dawn, breaking the silence. We got into something that shouldn't exist. A stretch of road off the map. Ghosts with our faces on them. And that bridge. Derek replied, his eyes red. Ghosts with our faces on them. And that bridge. Derek replied, his eyes red. I don't think we're completely off. The two decided to do one last search before leaving Nebraska. At a public library, they found an old state map of federal routes. It was from the 1970s. There, to their surprise, Route 7, which today appeared to be nothing special, had a handwritten note in blue pen. Stretched between kilometer 66 and 77, closed since 1974. Unstable area. Unexplained accidents. Unstable zone. Ethan looked up. What does that mean? Maybe it means what we saw, or something worse. But that wasn't the most disturbing thing. On the bulletin board in the town's historical archive, they found an enlarged copy of a yellowed newspaper article. The title read, Kilometer 77, 3 missing in 24 hours. Police close stretch for security reasons. There was a picture, a family hugging in front of a van, the mother, the father, and a little boy. Wait, whispered Derek, frozen. That boy. Ethan walked over. The boy in the photo had a mole on his neck, the same mole Derek had had all his life, but which mysteriously disappeared after a car accident in 2009. Derek, that's you. Derek recoiled as if he had seen a corpse. It can't be. No, it can't be. My parents were killed in an accident when I was 4 years old. They never knew what happened. They said the car fell into a ravine. Ethan looked at him with a mixture of horror and understanding. What if the ravine was the bridge? What if that trip was not an accident, but an encounter, an echo? What if what we experienced, what we saw, was a second chance we were not meant to have? Derek was no longer responding. He just stared at the paper. His pulse was racing. His heart was pounding in his chest like a war drum. Maybe they never got out. Maybe they never escaped. Back on the road, they decided to return to the place where it had all begun. Against all logic, against all instinct, they went back to look for the Phantom Fork, the point where the world seemed to split. For hours, they drove without finding anything. No sign that said Larkspur, no gravel road. Until on the horizon, around an unidentified bend, they saw it. A rusty sign covered by branches, barely visible, read, Detour 7B, permanently closed. Himself, the dam himself. "Shall we go?" asked Ethan. Derek nodded wordlessly. The road took them back to a blurred terrain, where the sky was turning a dull gray, as if the world was covered by a dirty tarp. The lines on the pavement were beginning to blur. The light poles were crooked, as if something had pushed them over. And then they saw it. Kilometer 77. There was no sign this time, just a huge scar on the asphalt. A burnt black line that crossed the road from side to side, as if time itself had been cut by that strip. They stopped the car. Ethan walked out first. He walked to the line. He looked at it for several seconds. Then he turned to Derek. "Do you feel that?" "Yes." There was no wind. There were no birds. There was no sound. Just a ringing in the ear, like the kind you hear before you lose consciousness. And then they both heard something else. A voice, not from the outside. Inside their heads. What starts on the road doesn't end off the road. What goes in leaves a part, and sometimes it comes back. Derek fell to his knees. The ground was shaking. So a lighthouse, a car, was coming from the opposite side. But it was not a modern car. It was a sedan from the 70s, exactly the same as the one they had seen abandoned days before, with the lights flashing and the door open. Inside, a figure watched them from the driver's seat. Ethan pulled out his cell phone, and without knowing why, started recording. But when he looked at the screen, the video showed nothing. Just an empty road, nothing behind, nothing in front, just fog. And in the center of Kilometer 77, a mirror. Literally, a full-length mirror, old, cracked, held up by a rusted iron frame. Had it always been there? How many times had they passed it without noticing? Ethan approached. In the reflection, it was not them, but a world behind. Dark, twisted, a distorted version of the road, where the sky was red and the road signs were covered with faces. And the creepiest part, inside the mirror, their other selves, the same ones they had seen on the bridge, were waiting for them. Ethan stepped back. "We have to break it." Derek nodded. He picked up a stone from the road and threw it with all his might. The mirror shattered. A scream arose from the bottom of the road. Not human. Something ancient, hollow, full of echoes. They ran. The car started like never before. They didn't look back. They didn't look in the mirrors. They didn't talk. They only heard a banging behind, in the trunk, as if someone or something had followed them. Three weeks later, Ethan uploaded the incomplete video to the internet. The clip was only 4 seconds long, but it went viral. In it, you can only see the road and a barely audible voice in the background saying, "Not all mirrors return the same." Thousands of people began to share theories. Creepypastas, urban legends, haunted routes. Some said that Kilometer 77 is a myth shared by truckers and night travelers. Others claimed that there are dozens of mirror routes in the United States, where time bends and reality breaks down. But one theory was the most disturbing. What we see in the mirror is not what we leave behind, but what we will one day be if we don't stop looking. Derek never spoke about it again. He moved out. He changed his name. Ethan, however, kept looking. And one night, while driving alone in Arizona, he saw something on the side of the road. A rusty sign, covered with branches, almost invisible. It said, "Detour 7B, permanently closed." And this time, he couldn't help but turn. Kilometer 236, don't look in the rearview mirror. Chapter 1, The Detour. Nevada, 2:17 a.m. I-80, stretched like a vein of asphalt across the parched desert flesh. Nick and Elena had been driving since dusk, the Ford pickup's headlights illuminating just a few yards. Beyond the cactus and rusted signs, Nick kept his hands steady on the steering wheel, but his eyes were already heavy as sandbags. Elena, her face pressed against the window, barely moved, dozing to the rhythm of the potholes. "Are you all right?" asked Nick in a hoarse voice. Elena nodded, not taking her eyes off the glass. There was something about the darkness that made her uncomfortable, a vague uneasiness, as if the night there was denser than elsewhere. "How much longer to the motel?" she whispered. Nick checked the GPS, but the screen was frozen. It hadn't updated the location for 20 minutes. He tried to restart it, but the application crashed. "I don't know," he says, "we're between kilometers 230 and 240. But he's stuck. Do you want us to stop?" "No," he said quickly. "Go on. I don't want to stay here." Nick smiled, humorless. He didn't want to stay either. Something about that road had the air of the cursed. An endless stretch. No gas stations, no sign, no cars passing in the opposite direction. That's when they saw it. A half-destroyed sign covered in dust and graffiti. "Detour to State Route 17. Shelter and gas 5 miles away." "Shall we take it?" asked Nick, hesitating. Elena did not answer right away. She felt a twinge in the back of her neck, as if her body knew something that her mind had not yet understood. "Yes, we'd better take it. I don't like this road." Nick turned the wheel and they entered the turnoff. The asphalt crunched under the wheels as if no one had stepped on it for decades. State Route 17-2, 42 a.m. The air became thicker. Dust hung in suspension like mist, reflecting off the van's headlights. The GPS signal was completely gone. To the sides, telephone poles were down or rotten. The landscape began to change. It was no longer just desert. Now there were dry trees, hawthorns, and bent signs. "What is that smell?" Elena asked, holding her nose. Nick smelled it, too. It was something between burnt meat and melted plastic. It wasn't coming from the truck. It was external, like something out there was rotting. In the distance, they saw lights. An old gas station. One of those with neon lights that blinked like in movies from the 50s. It was surrounded by rusty cars like stranded skeletons. It was surrounded by rusty cars like stranded skeletons. Nick parked. The engine roared as if it didn't want to shut off. "I don't like this," Elena said quietly. "It'll only take 5 minutes." They went down. The air was warm, dead, as if not moving. The crickets did not sing. Nothing could be heard. Inside the station, a man in a cowboy hat stared at them from behind the counter. His skin was as pale as paper, and his eyes were bloodshot. He smiled without showing his teeth. "Do you need gasoline or something else?" Nick hesitated. "What is this place?" The man did not answer. He just held out a paper map with hand-drawn routes. None of them matched the GPS. None of them had known names. Elena, behind Nick, began to tremble. "How long has no one been coming?" he asked. The man looked at them for a few seconds and then said, "They always come. They always leave." "How do we get out of here?" The man's smile widened. Now he did show his teeth. They were rotten, yellow, with chunks of flesh between them. "Don't look in the rearview mirror when you leave. No matter what you hear, don't look." Nick felt a shiver down his spine. He took Elena's hand and they walked out without looking back. Kilometer 236, 3:06 a.m. The route seemed endless. The map they had been given didn't help. They were back on the road, but everything seemed darker. The headlights barely illuminated a few meters, and the air smelled worse than before. Now there was a sound, a dull hum, like a distant swarm. Elena trembled in her seat. "Nick, I swear something is moving in the back." Nick said nothing. His gaze was fixed straight ahead. The steering wheel was sweating in his hands. He pursed his lips. "Nick, please, there's something in the back. Don't look. What that guy said, don't look in the rearview mirror. But there's someone back there. I can hear him breathing." Elena was crying, her hands over her mouth. Nick heard the noise too, a kind of wet panting, as if a huge animal was sitting right behind them. The rearview mirror, hanging in the center of the windshield, seemed to shake of its own accord. "Don't look," Nick muttered, like a mantra. But then the van stopped dead in its tracks. The engine died. "What did you do?" "Nothing. It turned itself off." A loud bang was heard on the roof. Then another in the trunk. Something was on top of the vehicle. It scraped the metal. It was dripping. Something could be heard crawling, drooling on the hot sheet. "He's on top. He's on top," Elena shouted. Nick tried to start the engine. Once, twice, 3 times. Nothing. The humming grew to almost a roar, and then they heard something. A deep voice coming from everywhere at the same time. "Kilometer 236. Welcome back." "It can't be. It can't be." "That was the number before the detour," Nick shouted. "We never left. We never left that road." Elena, in desperation, turned her head back, and he shouted, an animal scream, torn, inhuman. Nick turned around too, but it was too late. He saw him, a decomposed face, black as pitch, with lidless eyes and a smile that looked as if it had been cut with a knife. It stuck to the glass and whispered something that no one understood. Then it disappeared into thin air. The engine started again on its own. The headlights shone brightly. Elena was in shock. She didn't speak. She didn't blink. Nick stepped on the gas. He didn't look back. He didn't speak again until dawn. Sunrise, motel, last stop. When they arrived at the motel, the desk clerk looked at them funny. They were covered in dust. Elena wasn't talking. Nick just asked for a room without mentioning anything. "State Route 17?" asked the man as he wrote something down. "That road was closed 20 years ago. 15 people disappeared there. They never found the bodies." Nick swallowed. "Kilometer 236. The man looked at him carefully. "That number," is repeated in every disappearance. Why do you mention it? Nick did not answer. He took Elena to the bedroom. That night, as she slept with her eyes open, he tried to remember what he had seen in the rearview mirror, but he couldn't, because it was no longer a memory. It was an omen. Chapter 2. What Comes Back to You. Last Stop Motel. 7:12 M. The sun was just crossing the desert horizon when Nick awoke with a start. His arms were covered with red marks, as if something had scratched him during the night. He sat up, panting. Elena was still lying motionless, her eyes open. She was not sleeping, but she was not responding either. Elena? She didn't look at him. She just mumbled something, over and over again. He said my name. He said my name. He said my name. He said my name. Nick crouched down beside her, shivering. He touched her forehead, icy. He took her by the shoulders and shook her. Elena, wake up. She blinked. Once. Then she looked at him, but there was something in that look that was no longer hers. We shouldn't have looked back, he whispered, his voice as usual but hollow. Now he is coming with us. 8:03 a.m. Cafeteria next to the motel. Nick ordered double coffee, but didn't touch it. He just looked out the window toward his truck. The Ford was parked exactly where they'd left it, but something about its silhouette had changed. Something subtle, as if the proportions were no longer the same, as if the space inside was bigger than it should be. A woman with her hair in a bun and a denim shirt sat down in front of him. She watched him for a second. Did you see it too? Nick blinked. What? The kilometer? The detour? The service station that does not exist? Nick stiffened. He hadn't said a word. Not to the police. Not to the receptionist. He hadn't even described the place. How do you know? The woman held out an ID. Sergeant. Lydia Romero. Missing Persons Bureau. Elko County. Because I've been looking for my sister for 14 years. And the last thing she did was send me a message from that place. 3 words. Kilometer 236. Help. Nick swallowed. He wanted to speak, but his throat burned. The woman continued. Every time someone survives, they come back changed. Look at your girlfriend. Look at her eyes. How do you know she's my girlfriend? The woman ignored him. Tell me something. Did you see her look in the rearview mirror? Nick nodded, with a guilty sigh. She saw it first. Then I screamed. Then something spoke to us. Romero looked at him with pity. Then they've already got it in. That's no place, kid. That's a trap, a parasite, a nest. It only lets out those who can spread it. Spreading what? The woman leaned over and whispered, What comes back to you? 9:19 a.m. Back in the room, Nick found Elena sitting in front of the mirror, talking to her reflection. She didn't mimic his movements. She wasn't blinking at the same time. It wasn't a reflection. It was a defective copy. Who are you talking to? Elena turned around. She smiled like she hadn't since last night. A forced smile, as if learned from someone who had seen her do it before. It's almost ready, love. We just need one more night. Nick recoiled. That voice didn't have his tone. It had the same cadence, but not the same soul. What's ready? Elena looked at him, perplexed. Can't you feel it? That weight behind your eyes? That buzzing sound when you close your eyelids? Nick gritted his teeth. He could feel it. Ever since they left Route 17, like he had something tucked under his skull, pushing from the inside. What is happening to me? Elena smiled sweetly. You are opening up. 10:41 a.m., local police station. In desperation, Nick went to the sheriff's office. He didn't know where to turn. Sergeant Romero intercepted him in the hallway. "Don't do that," he told her firmly. "You can't bring in the authorities. They don't understand. Every time someone tries to take this to investigation, more people disappear." Nick leaned against the wall. "So what do I do? Do I leave it like this?" Romero held out a notebook. It was full of drawings, old photos, and newspaper fragments. "What you have to do is go back. There is only one way to cut it." Back? Back to kilometer 236, but not alone, and not at night. You must go with someone who has been there before, who has seen the co-pilot. "What?" Romero pointed to one of the photos. A boy, his eyes blackened, sat in the passenger seat of an abandoned pickup truck. In the image, the rearview mirror was broken from the inside. "The one who sits next to you and learns from you. The one who then imitates you. The one who goes in your place." Nick closed the notebook. "I'm not going to leave her there. If I have to go back, I'll go back. But not to lock it up, but to take it out." Romero sighed. "Then you need one last thing." "What?" "Breaking the mirror." 1,500 hours. Preparation for return. Nick returned to the motel. Elena was gone, but the van was. On the passenger seat, a handwritten note. "I'll be waiting for you where it all started. Don't be late, or it will stay with you." Nick carried a flashlight, the notebook, and a metal crowbar. He turned the rearview mirror upside down. He didn't look at it anymore. The sun was beginning to set. When he came out onto the road, Sergeant Romero intercepted him one last time. She handed him a small sealed box. "What is this?" "Ashes. From one that didn't make it out. Throw them at the exact point of the detour. He will want to get back what belongs to him." "Is that going to stop it?" "Number, but it will give you time." Romero drove away. Nick took a deep breath and started the van. The radio turned on by itself. Static, and a voice. "Kilometer 236. Welcome back, Nick." 2019 p.m. Back to the cursed kilometer. The road looked the same, but also not. The dust was thicker. The white lines of the asphalt were melting before his eyes. The sky was a deep red, as if burning beyond the horizon. Nick didn't look back. He didn't take a deep breath. He just stepped on the gas. The detour appeared again. The sign was the same, crooked, covered with rust. "Detour to State Route 17. Shelter and gas 5 miles away." Nick hit the brakes. He got down. He picked up the box of ashes and threw it on the floor of the intersection. A gust of wind hit him, dry and rotten, like a breath. And then he appeared. The whistle, the voice, the ringing in the ears that turned into words. "She doesn't want to leave, but you can stay." Nick climbed back into the van. He followed the detour. 20:41 p.m., service station, again. There it was, the gas station, the flashing neon, the rusty cars. But now there was a huge mirror at the entrance, like a portal. And on the other side, Elena, or something that looked like her. Nick descended. In his hand, the lever. He approached. Elena looked at him from the other side. "Don't come in. There's nothing left here. I was converted, not by looking, but by staying too long." Nick moved closer. "Tell me how to stop it." Elena smiled. Now it was her smile. For a second, her real face. "Destroy the reflection and run. Don't look at anything." Nick lifted the lever. The mirror vibrated. It screamed. From inside, misshapen figures began to stir, and he struck. Once, 2, 3. With each blow, shrieks filled the air, as if something more than glass was shattering. At the last impact, the mirror exploded. Elena screamed, but not from pain, but of liberation. Chapter 3. Those Left Behind. 21:07 p.m. Gas station remains. The fragments of the mirror sizzled on the ground, as if they contained energy that was still alive. Some shards floated, resisting to fall. The air was thick and vibrated with a barely audible murmur, as if many voices were speaking at once from far, far away. Nick gasped. In his hand, the lever was stained with a black substance. It was not blood. It wasn't oil. It was something worse, something writhing. In front of him, where Elena was once trapped on the other side of the mirror, there was now only an empty frame and the echo of muffled laughter. Elena. No response was received. He looked around. The station was gone. What remained were twisted metal columns floating in the nothingness. Like a half-erased, abandoned painting, the ground was a patch of asphalt that crumbled into dust if you stepped on it hard. And the sky, it no longer had stars. 21:19 p.m. The election. One step to his left, and Nick found himself in front of the van again. It was exactly where he left it. But there was a figure in the passenger seat. A slim figure, static, face covered by bandages, looking straight ahead. Nick took a step toward her. Elena? The figure did not move. It only turned its head slowly. The bandages began to moisten from the inside out, as if they were bleeding. Don't look in the rearview mirror. Nick froze. That voice. Yes, it was her, but not just her. It was her voice mixed with something else. I am here, but I'm also there. They left me a copy so you couldn't know who I am. If you choose wrong, the other one will go with you. Nick gritted his teeth. How do I know it's you? Because you know what I always say when we are afraid. Nick swallowed hard. He knew it. Something she used to say when they were younger, when they drove empty roads on stormy nights. Fear is just the body preparing the miracle. The figure in the passenger seat let out a sigh. The bandages fell off. It was Elena, the real one, full of tears but smiling. The figure behind him was also Elena, and he smiled just the same. 21:22 Hund p.m. The Trial of the Mirrors. He's going to try to trick you, said the real Elena. Don't look at him straight. Don't listen to the whole thing. Don't answer him. Nick turned slowly. The other Elena was still smiling, but her eyes were now completely black, like bottomless wells. And she spoke calmly. Remember me, Nick? Remember what we shared at that motel, when you swore never to leave me alone again? Nick felt the claw of fear crawl up his neck. The dark was perfect, the inflections, the memories, even her scent, but not its essence. What did you say when the lights went out? He asked. Fake Elena cocked her head to one side, that everything would be all right, that it would pass. Nick took a step back. You are wrong. Yes. She told me that if the power went out someday, we could still see each other if we closed our eyes and remembered the day we met. The fake Elena blinked, and it melted. Literally, the skin fell off like a burnt shell, and the face distorted into a howling mass of liquid flesh. You are not mine. You cannot break the circle. Nick jumped into the van, grabbed the real Elena's hand, and started up. 21:44 p.m. The return. The road was there again, but the other way around. Everything was inverted. The signs were illegible. The cars seemed to float a few centimeters above the asphalt, and the horizon rotated as if they were inside a cylinder. Nick drove without looking back, without looking at the mirrors. His hands were shaking, and Elena was crying silently, but not from fear, from relief. "Is it closed?" she whispered. "I don't know, I just know that we are dating." The radio crackled one last time, and a voice, soft, tired. "If you don't take me, I'll stay in your reflection." Nick did not answer. He stepped on the accelerator. Outside, shadows ran along the edges of the road. Some mimicked their shape. Others had too many arms, but none of them could enter. Until the mirror moved by itself, and it reflected something. Nick pushed it hard, smashed it with his palm. The glass shattered into 1,000 crystals that sparkled like flying insects. One of them went into his shirt. Another fell on the seat. Elena picked them up carefully. She whispered something in a language he didn't know. "What did you say?" "What the woman in the mirror told me. That what is broken there must be sealed here." Nick took a deep breath. The road was back to normal. 9 p.m., back in the real world. The sign that read, "Welcome to Elko County," passed by his window like a whisper. Lights, traffic lights, a fire truck. Everything was normal. Elena leaned her head on his shoulder. She smiled and closed her eyes. Nick parked the van in front of Sergeant Romero's office. She was already outside, waiting for them, as if she knew. "Did you?" Nick nodded. Romero looked at the sky. For the first time in years, there were stars. "Is she the one?" Nick looked at Elena. "Yes." She came back. Romero smiled. "A little bit. Just a little. Then get ready." "What for?" Romero looked him in the eye. "Because the mirror does not disappear. It just changes places, and you carry it with you." Epilogue. 3 weeks later, Nick and Elena moved. New state, new life. No one ever mentioned Route 17 again. But every time they enter a hotel, Nick covers all the mirrors. Every time you sit down to drive, check that the rear view mirror is covered. And sometimes, when the sun is reflected in the window, he sees something else behind him. Something his face learned. And he still observes it. Chapter 1. The Man with the Right Shoulder. Interstate Route 70 runs through the heart of the United States like an immense scar. At that instant, the truck's door handle moved. Luis looked at her in horror. Someone was trying to get in. The handle jerked hard, then blows 3, 4, 5, like punches against the door. Luis took his knife from the side compartment and took a deep breath. But then they stopped. A whisper. Something called her name from the other side of the door. It was not her daughter's voice, nor human. It was as if something had learned her name, as if it was repeating it with curiosity and hunger. The cold enveloped him. The flashlight began to flicker, and then in the distance, some lights came on. A truck was approaching. Luis jumped on the horn. He honked to again and again. He shouted. He moved the lights. The truck passed without stopping, as if I didn't see him, as if he didn't exist. And in the mirrors, as the other truck drove away, Luis saw reflected what was behind his trailer. A tall figure, too tall, with his face covered by a shadow that came from nowhere, and 2 eyes, red, open as if they had not blinked for centuries. Luis froze, and then the creature smiled. Luis Barreto did not know how long he remained motionless in front of the steering wheel, his eyes glued to the rear-view mirror, watching the figure that seemed to blur in the shadows of the desert. The smile of that thing. because he could no longer call it a person, was too wide, unnatural. It stretched as if its face had been ripped from ear to ear, and the eyes, they shone with a light that no headlights reflected. But when he blinked, the figure was gone. Only the trailer, the dirty wheels, and the closed night, immense, swallowing all sound. Luis grabbed the radio again with trembling hands. Breaker, breaker, does anyone copy? This is Tiger. I repeat, this is Tiger. Truck stopped at kilometer 237. I need urgent assistance. Static only. Not even interference. Not a whisper. Channel 19 was still as mute as the road. Luis thought about going out again, checking the trailer. Maybe someone had snuck into the cargo. Maybe a vagrant, a drug addict, a madman. But the image of the tall figure, his eyes and that smile, stopped him. He wasn't human. He couldn't be. He pulled out his cell phone. No signal. That wasn't unusual either. That area was known for its dead zones, places where the phone became an expensive paperweight. He cursed under his breath. He knew no one would come. No one would answer. He was alone. He put his hands back on the steering wheel. He wanted to start again. Nothing. The engine roared faintly, as if something had been drained out of it, as if the soul of the truck, if that was possible, had been sucked out. And at that moment, the dashboard lit up for no apparent reason. All lights, all the gauges. The gas needle went crazy. The GPS screen started flashing, but it didn't show the map. It showed a sentence, "You're not where you think you are." Luis knocked on the dashboard. The screen went off. Then, something slid out the passenger window. Something that was not heard, that was not seen. An odor. A rancid metallic stench like old blood and burnt flesh. And it was coming from the passenger seat, where until a second ago there was nothing. He turned his head slowly. The seat was empty, but on the upholstery there was now a marked hand, a dark imprint, as if something had rested there, wet, sticky, and a voice, very close, right next to his left ear. "Do you remember the one on the radio?" Luis lunged for the door, flung it open and fell to the ground, rolling on the hot gravel of the highway. He got up scraped, blood on his elbows, but alive. He ran toward the trailer without looking back and hid under the trailer. From there, breathing heavily, he saw something move inside the cabin. A silhouette, slim, tall, with arms too long. Something was now sitting where he had been seconds ago, and his truck, his companion for so many trips, started by itself. The engine came to life. The lights came on. The horn sounded once, then another. But it wasn't his horn. It was deeper, more guttural, like the bellowing of a mechanical animal. The truck began to move slowly, moving without a driver down the highway. Luis ran in desperation. He came out of hiding and shouted, "Hey, that's not possible. Get off my truck." But the truck did not stop. And as he walked away, the radio inside the cabin burst into laughter. Multiple, mixed, like a chorus of children and old people laughing at the same time. Laughter that came from no human throat. Luis fell to his knees in the middle of the asphalt. The darkness became absolute after the disappearance of the headlights. The loneliness thickened, and then he heard another engine. Different, old, a familiar sound, but slower, more draggy, like a 1970s diesel engine, with free exhaust and dying spark plugs. Out of nowhere, a truck appeared in the distance, a rusty mass, painted a faded red by the years. It approached without haste, as if it were floating instead of rolling. Luis signaled. He waved his arms, Hey, I need help. The truck slowed down a few meters away. The windshield was covered by a thick film of dust and dirt. The driver was not visible. Luis approached slowly, hesitating. Something in the air oppressed him, a feeling sticky, like when you walk into a room where someone has cried too much. He put one foot up on the passenger side running board. He knocked on the door. Hello? Can you help me? My truck is gone. I mean, they took it away. I don't know how to say it. Nothing. He struck again, and suddenly the window lowered by itself. An intense cold hit him in the face, and then he saw the driver. It was him, Luis, older, emaciated, with a long beard, sunken eyes, as if he hadn't slept in years, and worst of all, no pupils, just two white, opaque circles. You handled it once, didn't you? Said the figure in his distorted voice. Luis stepped back. What are you? I'm what comes when no one else answers, said the figure, and held out his hand. If you go up, maybe you'll come back. Maybe you won't. But at least you won't die here. Luis shook his head, turned and ran into the darkness. He walked for hours. The highway seemed endless. No more vehicles were passing. There were no signs, no cicada noises, no animals, no wind. Just absolute silence, which became heavier as the minutes passed. Then he saw a motel in the middle of nowhere, no cars in the parking lot, with a flashing sign, VICANCY. Luis entered, driven more by panic than logic. The interior was old. It smelled musty wallpaper. At the counter was a bald man, wearing black glasses, reading a yellowed newspaper. Do you have rooms? Luis asked. The man looked up. He smiled, but his mouth had no teeth. Of course, Mr. Barreto, the same as always. How do you know my name? The man did not answer. He handed him a rusty key with a hand-engraved number, 13. Luis went upstairs, opened the door and turned on the light. In the room there was a bed, an old television, and a radio on, tuned to channel 19. A voice came out of her, familiar. Luis, are you still there? Luciana, she whispered, not understanding. Dad, don't close your eyes. If you sleep here, you won't come back. Luis turned to the door. It was locked, and there was no handle on the inside. I was trapped. He ran to the window. He stuck his elbow in. Broken glass. He cut himself. He screamed. He jumped. He fell to the asphalt. The room was gone. I was at kilometer 237 again, alone. But something new was happening. The air vibrated, and from the horizon, hundreds of lights began to light up. Headlights, engines, radios, trucks, all stopped in the distance, motionless. A procession of empty trucks, as if they were rolling tombs, and they all lit up at the same time, one by one, driving slowly towards it. No drivers, no destination, just a chorus of radios that began to murmur in unison. You are no longer where you thought you were. You're not where you thought you were. Luis ran, but there was nowhere to go. Only asphalt, and kilometers of a nightmare that was just beginning. Luis Barreto was running, but there was no end to the highway. The ground beneath his boots seemed to repeat itself, as if the asphalt was trapped in an eternal loop. The same potholes, the same remnants of burst tires, the same dead insects on the white line of the shoulder, and the sound of the trucks behind never ceased. There were dozens, no hundreds, all lit up, all moving slowly, all empty. Luis stopped, panting, his chest burning. He was on the verge of collapse. He had not slept. He had not eaten. He didn't know if he had been lost for hours or days on that impossible stretch of road. The sky was still the same, a black canvas with no moon. and the portable radio hanging from his belt was crackling again. "Luis, go back to the cabin," whispered a voice, faint, cracked. "You still can." He recognized her. It was his own, but it sounded old, like a deteriorated recording played on an old cassette, a version of himself that he no longer remembered being. He fell to his knees on the shoulder. He began to cry, not out of fear, out of exhaustion, because his mind was slowly unraveling, because he didn't know if he was still alive. Then, in the background, on the horizon line, he saw a silhouette walking, a tall figure, slim, arms hanging like ropes. She walked as if she didn't touch the ground. Luis wanted to shout, but his voice did not come out. The figure approached, slowly, steadily, and when it was about 20 meters away, it stopped. "Do you know how many have died here, Luis Barreto?" he asked in a hollow voice impossible to locate. "Do you know how many truck drivers crossed this point and were never found?" Luis was trembling. "What are you? I am not what matters," said the figure. "It's what you carry that matters, and you've been carrying more than you know." Luis looked at his back. There was nothing. No luggage, no cargo. "You don't understand," said the figure. "I'm not talking about the physical. I'm talking about what you carry in your memory." And then, without her being able to help it, a scene burst into her head. The night of the accident, the one I had always tried to forget. It was raining. Luis was driving on a secondary road on the outskirts of Chihuahua. He was running late. He was accelerating. The windshield was barely visible. On a sharp curve, something crossed the road. A glow. 2 eyes. Crash. The body of a young man flew through the air and was trapped under the rear axle of the trailer. Luis climbed down. It was raining. The boy was still breathing, gasping, his spine broken. He was mumbling something. "Tell Mom. Tell her I tried." Luis did not call 911. He had no papers in order. He was drunk. He dragged him into the bush and covered him with branches, and he left. He got back behind the wheel. He kept driving. He never spoke about it again. The figure in front of him nodded slowly. "That was the day you entered kilometer 237. You didn't know it, but from then on, your route was different. I didn't do it on purpose. It was an accident," Luis shouted. "Of course they do. Nobody does it on purpose. But when you kill along the way, you're marked." The figure dissolved into shadows, and the sky changed. The night disappeared like a torn curtain. Dawn filtered in. The road appeared clear. The sun hit his face. Luis woke up. He was inside his truck. It was all a dream. The radio was on, playing country music. He looked around. He was parked in a rest area. There were other truckers nearby. One was drinking coffee from a thermos. Another was cleaning the windshield of his trailer. Luis sighed. "God, what a nightmare," he said to himself. He started the engine. It was running well. The GPS screen showed his exact position, kilometer 236. He smiled. He started up. He entered the highway. But after 5 minutes, the radio changed station by itself, and a childish voice whispered, "Now you're just going to keep driving like it's nothing." Luis paled. The road again stretched more than usual. The GPS started to blink. Kilometer 237, Kilometer 237, Kilometer 237, Kilometer 237, and then the same boy from the accident appeared again in the middle of the road, smiling. Luis stepped on the brakes. Too late. The blow was sharp, violent, but this time when he came down, There was no body, just a backpack and a letter. The same letter the boy had in his pocket that night. Luis opened it with trembling hands. It said, "Dad, if you read this, it's because you finally stopped." Luis screamed. He collapsed. He fell onto the road. The radio burst into static. The truck began to burn from the inside, with no visible fire, and everything disappeared. Years later, in trucker forums, there is talk of a cursed stretch on a Mexican secondary highway, where the radios fail, where the GPS goes crazy, and where some truckers claim to have seen a guy named Luis walking with a blank stare, asking if anyone copies him on Channel 19. No one knows who it really was, but everyone avoids, at all costs, stopping at kilometer 237, because once you cross, there's no turning back. Route 77 does not forgive. Blake Hargrove had seen some strange things in his 15 years behind the wheel, but nothing like what awaited him that night. It was 2:43 a.m. when the steady roar of his old Kenworth T800 seemed to be the only thing alive for miles around. Route 77, an old back road that crisscrossed part of Oklahoma, was famous among truckers for being a shortcut with no toll booths or checkpoints. It was also famous for something else, something many avoided saying out loud. There were those who called it the Devil's Tongue, and not because of the infernal layout of curves, but because of the stories that were woven about it. Disappearances, voices on the radio, lights that had no source, and trucks that never arrived. But Blake was not superstitious. Not after being divorced 3 times and still paying pensions. To him, gas was more real than any ghost, and time was money. So when his GPS suggested a detour on Route 77 to get to Houston sooner, he didn't think twice. "Come on, old lady," he murmured, patting the board. "Don't fail me now." He turned on the radio, only static. He searched for a local station. Nothing. He went back to his playlist, but Spotify had lost signal. Everything was normal up to that point. Normal for Route 77. It was about 15 minutes before he noticed that he had not seen a single oncoming vehicle. Not even a glimmer in the distance. Neither houses, nor posts, nor new signposts.